Hi, today I'd like to show you how I make my kick drum patches, and this is just how I personally do it. This isn't, there isn't one true way of doing it. This is just what works well for me right now. So first of all, you can see here that I have got the notes coming in from the door, and if we look at the velocities, it's again a very simple boolean. Some of the notes have accents, some of them don't. So it's going to be a very simple 808 or 909 style kind of affair there. Eventually I should get into the habit more of having a full range of velocities, but for now it's just on or off, just boolean, true or false, which is, it still adds quite a dimension to the sound compared to not having any kind of accent or velocity at all. If you haven't cultivated the habit yet of having any kind of velocities, I recommend doing that because it adds a whole dimension to the sound, especially to drum patterns which are all about the rhythm. So first of all, let's just wire up a very simple patch that everyone should be fairly familiar with. We can take the output of an oscillator, say a nice sawtooth wave, and feed that all the way up here into a VCA. A VCA is an automatically controlled volume, so it's like you've got a robot riding a volume fader for you automatically. And we're going to go back out of the VCA into, this is just a breakout module that Nina made for me, which is very nice of her, and that just feeds into my DAW. So the input of that is the input on the breakout box going to my DAW, and we're going to control the volume using a regular popular ADSR envelope generator. That's the most common kind you get on synthesizers. So that's now controlling the volume. I'll turn it down a bit so it doesn't deafen everyone. And that'd be much better. There we go. You can see this is set to exponential because our hearing is exponential. So when something's twice as loud as something else, it sounds a bit louder rather than much louder. There's a more mathematical way of saying that, but that's the gist. Right, so the first thing we'll do is change this to a sound a bit more behooling of drums. Let's say a sine wave. And the next thing I want to do is change the envelope generator, because ADSR is a bit too fancy for drums. With drums, it doesn't care how long the note lasts. All it cares about is when the note starts, and the length of the note is just how long it takes the drum to decay. So there's no kind of holding down notes, so we'll ignore that. So what we'll do is we'll use one of these voltage controlled decays, which doesn't use the bus at the back. So we're going to go to the front here. We take the gate output here and we go all the way into the decays trigger in. Gates and triggers are basically the same for our purposes. With the gate, the signal goes high when the note starts and it goes low again when the note stops. With this, it's just going to pay attention to the rising edge, not the falling. So it doesn't matter that it takes a bit longer to fall, we don't care. So we take the output of that instead. And that's, if you ignore the clickiness, it's fairly drum-like. It's a bit more obvious if we use a different waveform. There we go. And we can change how long that takes to decay. The next thing we'll do to make it more drum-like, it's a nice middle balance there. Okay, next thing we'll do to make it more drum-like is we'll change the pitch over time, because with an actual drum, what happens is as it continues playing, the note droops slightly. So instead of sounding like do do, it sounds more do do, only not that exaggerated. But it's a synthesizer, which means we can exaggerate it for fun. So let's try that. We can take the gate output again, and this time use that to control another voltage controlled decay. So going into the trigger input. This one's set to a much shorter time, and we can use that to sweep the pitch. Now by default the pitch is just whatever it's set to. It's linked to the CV on the bus behind everything, so whatever the DAW's telling it, it's playing those notes, which is an advantage here of using an oscillator instead of a filter for drums. You can actually pitch them, so you can have all of your kick drums be in, say, the keys root note, or the root note of whichever chord you're playing at the time, or just any note that's in the chord you're playing at the time. So now we're sweeping the sound. We can change how much we're sweeping the pitch, so really get into kind of Kraftwerk style or something a bit more subtle. We can change how long it takes to do that. If it's quite short, it sounds very drum-like. And we can also change the length of time it takes for the drum in general. And you can't help but like that, can you? You can exaggerate it a lot more than, say, an 808 can. Right, so another thing I've noticed people doing a lot with synthesizers is when it comes to the drum sounds, they'll take a filter and they'll crank up the resonance until it self-oscillates, and they'll sweep that down as the sound. You can do that. For instance, I've got an MS-20 style filter here, the A-100 Extreme filter, and if you read the instruction manual, it says that it makes any sound other than a sine wave, so it's kind of fun and interesting to use that for drums occasionally. But I think the only reason most people use a filter for that instead of an oscillator is because with a hardwired synthesizer such as a Mini Moog, an SH-101, anything in between, that's the only way you can do it. But if you have a modular, and it doesn't need to be a physical or analog one, it can be a plug-in, but if you've got any kind of modular synthesizer, you can hook up anything to anything. So you can easily hook up an envelope generator such as this or this to an oscillator, and then you get to choose the waveform you're doing it with. So for instance, I'm using a triangle wave here, which is quite nice, I think, a nice kind of middle ground. You can use a sine wave, which is a kind of pure waveform with less harmonics. Or you can use, say, a square wave if you really want to make it sound really kind of heavy by comparison with more harmonics. It's a bit more Aphex Twin, less Kraftwerk. It's a similar sound to distortion, because you know that just makes it kind of clip if using digital distortion. But I'm going to use a triangle wave here because I think it's a nice middle ground. And what I'm going to do now is start introducing the actual velocity into the equation. So as a starting point, what's nice to do is just work out what you want the quietest drum sounds to sound like. So not too exaggerated, not taking too long, being pretty short and dull, having quite a quiet volume, and then we can start introducing the velocities into the equation. So you can take the velocity output here straight from the DAW, well, through a MIDI to CV converter. I'm using a Kenton Pro 2000 Mark II, which is a very nice one. We can take the velocity out and put it into multiples. So now we've got 3 instances of the velocity out, so we can control 3 different things with it. And using that, I'm going to go all the way back up to the VCA. Let's see. Right, this is actually a dual VCA, so there's 2 of them, and because I've got actually 2 of the modules, there's 4 different VCAs here. Okay, so instead of directly controlling the volume of the sound with the envelope generator, I'm instead going to make the envelope generator go in here, and using a tiny patch cable, I'm going to take that output and feed it into the input of the other VCA, and the gain here is the the gain here is the initial amount it's doing it without any extra help, so that's the minimal amount. So that's a good kind of minimum volume there. And what we're going to do is we're going to in effect multiply this with the velocity. So we're going to go all the way from the multiple over here all the way up to the VCA, And now we're going to affect the maximum velocity for the accented notes. Okay, so the accented notes have a higher volume now, which is nice. But in addition to that, we can make them last longer, and we can make the pitch sweep last longer, so we can hear how that would sound. So we can take the output from the buffer multiple again. Buffer just means that it can have lots of outputs, and it's not going to have the usual constraints of electricity, where the more things you connect it to, the less it affects them. So you can actually connect it to a bunch of different stuff without it kind of sagging at all. So if we hook it up to this, then we can change the amount that the velocity affects the note length. So now the harder you hit the drum, the longer the note lasts, which I think is fairly kind of realistic concept there. And we can also make it affect how long it takes to sweep down to pitch. Probably going to be a bit more subtle about that one, but there you go. You could even use another VCA, which I won't do now, but you could use another VCA in between the output of this and the input here to affect the amount that the velocity or anything else would affect how much the pitch sweeps. So the louder the note, the more extreme the pitch sweep, the higher the frequency it starts at, while still going all the way down to the actual note that you're playing. So you've got quite a few options with the synthesizer here. Another thing that's nice about modular synthesizers is that you can put all the different components that you want in any order. So when it comes to filtering, the drum sounds tend to have a click on them because they're just so fast to rise up at first that they're going to kind of not wait for the oscillator to start the beginning of the next cycle, so you get a click sound at the beginning. If you filter it at the end of the whole process, then it does somewhat mitigate the click, but then you can do that on a mixing desk anyway, or any kind of plugin that emulates a mixing desk, because EQing is basically the same thing as filtering anyway. But you know, it's something that you can do with a modular. Anyway, so yeah, there's more things you can do, but usually this is pretty much all I do here for a kick drum sound, and they generally sound a bit like this. You can go all the way from kind of Kraftwerk to Aphex Twin to various other bits in between. So yeah, next time you want a drum sound, you can use a drum module like 808 style, 909 style, but if you want something a bit different, then yeah, I'd recommend doing that, because you can tune them for one thing, and you have a sound that's all just something, you know, all to yourself, that no one else is quite doing anything just like it. There's also snare drums I can very quickly describe. At least I do it a very lazy way, which is to turn it up an octave, which on its own sounds a bit rubbish, but then you add in a burst of white noise that you filter, either high pass or band pass, and you get that just right, and it starts sounding like a snare drum. The only problem is you really start to run out of envelope generators. I've got 3 voltage controlled decays, and when you start adding in the actual sound of the snare, which is basically the burst of white noise, and you want to control how long that takes based on the velocity, it starts to get complex quickly. So what I think I might do next time, and probably going forwards now, is tear down the drum part of the snare drum in order to make the snare part of the snare drum, because the thing about multi-track recorders is you can basically cheat. I've only got 2 VCOs now. I used to have 3, but I sold the 3rd one because Generally I don't need it. I mean, when it comes to modulating each other and doing fun things like that, you only really need two. Layering them up, yeah, you can have as many as you want, but if you multi-track record, you just record the same part again and again and again. It sounds like you've got more anyway. So instead of having 3 oscillators in a patch, I just have 2 and I record it twice and it sounds like 4, or record it 3 times and it sounds like 6. So in that vein, yeah, if you just do a brief burst of white noise by itself and record it 3 times, and you drag the clips ever so slightly left and right, it sounds like hand claps. And if you record a drum on one pass and the actual snare part of the snare drum in another pass, then you can reuse all the modules, and that's probably going to be quicker and easier to do. So that's what I'm going to try for snares. But the main thing I'm showing you here is the kick drum. The rest is just kind of variants. Most drum sounds are basically this. If you look at how the 808 works, it's congas and toms and kick drums are all the same circuit, I believe, just playing back different pitches. So you can pretty much do the same thing here with the modular. Anyway, I hope that's kind of been kind of interesting or educational to someone out there. That's how I make drum sounds. So, by all means, you know, experiment. Let me know if you've got any tips, if there's anything else I could improve here. Because, you know, this is just what I've stumbled across so far, reading Sound on Sound's Gordon Reed's Synth Secrets series and stuff like that. So please let me know any tips in the comments. Thank you.